The most dangerous conversations in the world happen in rooms where nobody thinks to watch the bookkeeper. Haverford and Associates occupied the 32nd floor of a glass tower in downtown Toronto, the kind of building where the lobby smelled of imported marble and quiet money. It was not a law firm, not a brokerage, not exactly anything that a licensing board would recognize. On paper, it managed private equity portfolios and structured asset transfers for a rotating roster of high-net-worth clients. In practice, everyone on the floor above the 32nd knew exactly what Haverford and Associates really was. The people on the 32nd floor preferred not to think about it. Sylvie Beaumont was one of those people. She was 31 years old, with dark brown hair she kept pinned back in a practical knot, reading glasses perpetually smudged at the left lens, and a body that clothing catalogues euphemistically called full-figured. She wore structured blazers in charcoal and navy, the kind with extra room through the shoulders that she had tailored herself, because off-the-rack never quite worked. She had worked in financial compliance for 6 years, the last 3 at Haverford. She was meticulous, invisible, and very good at her job. She reconciled the numbers. She flagged discrepancies. She kept her head down and her observations to herself. The observations were the thing, though. Sylvie had always seen more than people expected. It was the particular gift of someone who had learned early that the world wasn't designed for her to take up space in, so she had learned instead to be still and to watch. She noticed the way a person's breathing changed when they were lying. She noticed mismatched timestamps in financial documents that should have synced. She noticed during a portfolio review in the second-floor boardroom on a cold Wednesday in February that the man seated across the glass table from her managing partner was not who he had been introduced as. His name, according to the visitor's log, was Mr. Calloway. Import-export, Geneva office. He had a firm handshake, grey temples, and an easy smile. He also had a slight indent on his left wrist that Sylvie recognized from a case study in a financial crime seminar she had attended 3 years prior. It was the kind of mark left by a specific model of GPS monitoring bracelet used by Interpol in coordinated asset freezing operations. She said nothing. She finished the meeting, returned to her desk, and put her headphones in. She told herself it wasn't her business. It wasn't her business for exactly 11 more days. The dinner was held at Obsidian, which was the kind of restaurant that didn't advertise and didn't need to. It occupied the ground floor of a heritage building on King Street West, all dark walnut paneling and copper light fixtures, and the particular hush of a room where no one felt the need to raise their voice. The reservation list was managed by a woman named Cordelia, who had worked there for 20 years and had the instincts of a Swiss vault. Obsidian did not have walk-ins. It did not have a website. Its clientele included federal cabinet ministers, 2 retired hockey franchise owners, and, on certain evenings, the kind of men whose business interests existed in the space between what was legal and what was simply not yet prosecuted. Sylvie was there because Haverford required certain senior compliance staff to attend client hospitality events twice a year. It was framed as relationship management. In practice, it meant sitting quietly at a corner table with a glass of Riesling, making polite conversation with portfolio managers, and being back at her desk by 9 the next morning with her notebook full. She had been refilling the water glasses at table 6. Not because it was her job, but because the server had disappeared for 10 minutes, and 3 clients were sitting with empty glasses, and Sylvie had been raised in a household where you handled things. When she first saw him, she had heard the name Lucien Vale before. It was the kind of name that moved through the upper floors of Haverford like a weather system. People changed their posture when they said it. Managing partners cleared their afternoons. The general understanding, never articulated directly in her presence, was that Lucien Vale's logistics company, Northern Passage Holdings, incorporated in Montreal, with subsidiaries in Vancouver and Halifax, was one of Haverford's oldest and most significant accounts. The other understanding, the one that lived in the subtext of certain conversations, was that the logistics company was what it was. The man himself was nothing like she had pictured. He was tall in the way that didn't announce itself, the kind of height that simply occupied a room rather than demanding acknowledgement. Early 40s, dark hair with silver threading through it at the temples, a charcoal suit that had been cut by someone who understood anatomy rather than fashion. His face was angular and unreadable, the expression of a man who had long ago decided that offering the world his interior life was a losing proposition. He moved through the restaurant with the unhurried confidence of someone who had never once been told to wait. He was seated at table 9. Beside him was a woman named Simone. Sylvie knew Simone by reputation. Simone Arquette, the daughter of a Quebec senator, had been photographed at approximately every charity gala in the country for the past 4 years. She was sharp-featured and luminous in white silk, her dark hair swept back with the effortlessness that required considerable effort. She looked at Lucien Vail the way one might look at a very beautiful, very expensive object that one had decided to acquire. She also, Sylvie noticed while setting a water glass down at the adjacent table, had her phone under the table. It was not a subtle observation. Simone's thumb was moving with the focused rapidity of someone who was not browsing but communicating, and she was doing it with her body angled slightly away from the man beside her. Her smile maintained with the conscious precision of someone managing a performance. Sylvie set the water glass down and moved back toward the service station. She looked toward table 4, 2 men in suits that were a half size too large through the chest, sitting over untouched glasses of scotch. They hadn't looked at the menu. Their eyes moved in a pattern that Sylvie had no formal training to identify, but recognized nonetheless. It was the same scanning pattern she had observed in security details at political fundraisers. Systematic, repeating, never settling. She looked toward the bar. A man in a navy peacoat had been seated on the same stool for 40 minutes. He hadn't ordered food. His right hand was resting in his coat pocket. She looked toward the kitchen corridor. The young sommelier who usually stood near the pass had gone very quiet. Sylvie's mind did not panic. It organized. She had spent 6 years identifying patterns in numbers that didn't belong together. A cluster of transactions, each individually plausible, that collectively indicated something was wrong. This was the same. Men who weren't eating. A woman with a hidden phone. Eyes that tracked a single table, and Lucien Vail, sitting at the center of it all, completely unaware. Simone stood up, smoothing her dress. "I need a moment," she said, her voice carrying the easy grace of someone doing a very ordinary thing. She touched Lucien's shoulder briefly. Not with affection, Sylvie noted, but with the practiced precision of a woman marking a position, and walked toward the restrooms at the back. The man in the peacoat shifted on his stool. Sylvie was already moving. She did not run. Running would be noticed. She walked with the brisk purposefulness of someone who had a task, navigating through the room with the particular invisibility she had carried her entire life. The invisibility of the woman who didn't fit the aesthetic, who moved through elegant spaces as furniture rather than as a person. No one tracked her. No one registered her path. She was simply part of the room's machinery. She ducked into the narrow corridor beside the service station, pressing herself against the tiled wall. Her hands were trembling. Her mind was operating with terrifying clarity. She needed something to write on. She pulled a folded compliance summary from her blazer pocket. She always had something in her pocket. It was an occupational habit, and tore a small, clean margin from the bottom of the page. She found a pen clipped to her inside pocket. Her handwriting was always precise. She made it smaller. Simone is working with them. 3 men, bar stool, table 4-2 kitchen corridor. They're waiting for her to clear the room. She folded the paper. She put it in her palm. Her heart was doing something extraordinary against her ribs, but she breathed through it, the way she breathed through every quarterly audit, every discrepancy review, every moment that required her to be steadier than she felt. She walked back out into the dining room. Lucien Vale was looking at his phone. His wine glass was 2/3 full. He was the picture of a man enjoying a quiet evening, which was the most dangerous kind of picture. Sylvie approached table 9 from his left side, the way she had been approaching tables all evening. She picked up the water pitcher from the cart. She topped up his glass with the unhurried professionalism of someone who had been doing this for years. "Your sparkling water, Mr. Vale," she said, her voice calm and even. He glanced up. He had grey eyes. She hadn't expected grey eyes. They were the kind of grey that had seen a significant number of things. "Thank you," he said. It was a reflex, polite and genuine, the kind of thank you that came from a person who actually meant it. As she set the pitcher down, she slid the folded paper under the base of his wine glass with 2 fingers, the motion completely absorbed by the angle of her body. She held eye contact with him for exactly 2 seconds, long enough to be deliberate, short enough not to draw the room, and then looked pointedly, very briefly, at the bar. Then at table 4. Then she turned and walked away. She did not look back. She stationed herself near the linen cupboard beside the kitchen entrance, which gave her a sightline to table 9 and was behind the natural eye line of everyone else in the room. Her fingers gripped the edge of the cart beside her. Lucien Vale did not move for 4 seconds. Then he picked up his wine glass, took a measured sip, and set it back down. His left hand dropped casually below the table. When it came back up, it was empty. He had taken the paper. He read it the way she had hoped he would, without visible reaction. The only thing that changed was the set of his jaw, a fractional tightening that would have meant nothing to anyone who hadn't been watching for it. His posture shifted in a way that looked like relaxation and was its precise opposite. Every muscle in his back redistributed from ease to readiness. He reached into his breast pocket and sent a text. 30 seconds later, 2 men materialized from the stairwell adjacent to the bar. Not from the street, from inside the building, moving with the quiet efficiency of people who had been waiting on instruction. They were not the men from table 4. They were different men entirely. Things happened very quickly after that. The man in the peacoat reached into his coat, and Lucien was no longer at the table. He had moved with a speed that seemed disproportionate to his unhurried manner, placing himself behind the structural column between tables 8 and 9. The 2 men from the stairwell converged on the bar with a professionalism that the peacoat man had not anticipated. The men from table 4 stood up. "Stay down," Lucien said, and his voice carried without effort across the entire dining room. Not a shout, a statement of fact. The room dropped. Guests hit the floor or flattened against banquettes. Sylvie pressed herself against the wall of the linen cupboard. There were 3 muted sounds that she would process later as having been suppressed gunfire. There was a crash of glassware. There was a period of approximately 12 seconds that she could not entirely account for in her memory because her mind had gone to a very specific, very quiet place to manage it. Then there was silence. Lucien stood in the center of the dining room. His suit jacket was torn at the left shoulder seam. His breathing was controlled and even. 2 of the 3 men were on the floor, immobilized rather than dead. She registered this with enormous relief before fully understanding why it mattered to her. The man from the peacoat was being restrained by the men from the stairwell. Simone Arquette had emerged from the direction of the restrooms and stopped at the edge of the corridor, reading the room. The blood drained from her face in a single, visible wave. Lucien looked at her. The look was very quiet and very final. "Simone," he said. She opened her mouth. "Don't," he said. "Your brother borrowed $4 million from the Kellerman Group. You chose this over a phone call. We're done." Her chin trembled. Whatever she had prepared to say dissolved. He turned away from her with the completeness of a man closing a chapter that had already been written. His eyes swept the room with the methodical calm of someone taking inventory, and then they stopped. They stopped on Sylvie. She was still against the wall of the linen cupboard, the water pitcher still in her hand, which she realized she had been holding for the entire duration. Her knuckles were white. Her glasses had slid down her nose. Lucien Vale looked at her for a long moment. Then he walked toward her. She stood her ground. She was not certain why. Every reasonable instinct suggested that moving away from a man who had just demonstrated he was prepared for significant violence was the appropriate response. But her legs had apparently decided otherwise. He stopped 2 feet away from her. Up close, he was even more still. It was not the stillness of someone who was calm. It was the stillness of something with a great deal of contained momentum. "The bookkeeper," he said. "Not a question. Compliance," she said, because it seemed important to be specific. His eyes moved to the water pitcher in her hand, then back to her face. "You noticed Simone. Her micro-expressions were off. She was managing her face, not feeling it." Sylvie heard herself saying it with the detached clarity of someone filing a report. "And she was texting under the table with her body angled away from you. In a relationship with any genuine investment, that's not a position people assume unconsciously." He studied her. "The men at table 4 weren't eating," she continued, because apparently she was committed now. "The man at the bar hadn't ordered. The sommelier had been replaced. The pattern was wrong. My security team swept this building 2 hours ago," Lucien said. "I know," Sylvie said. "They were looking for weapons and devices. They weren't looking at the seating pattern. Nobody looks at the seating pattern." She paused. "Nobody looks at me either. It's useful." Something shifted in his expression. It wasn't warmth, exactly. It was more like recognition, the specific expression of someone encountering something they didn't have a category for. "You wrote the note on compliance paper," he said. "It was what I had. You tore the margin off to avoid the letterhead." "I was thinking about plausible deniability," she admitted. "For you, specifically. If I had miscalculated and you were involved, a note with Haverford's letterhead would have been a problem." He was quiet for a moment. The sounds of sirens had begun outside, distant but approaching. Behind them, the efficient movement of people Sylvie was beginning to understand were not restaurant staff, continued with quiet urgency. "Why did you do it?" Lucien asked. Sylvie thought about the various sophisticated answers available to her and discarded them. "You said thank you," she said, "when I poured the water." "You meant it." She pushed her glasses back up. "People like you don't usually mean it." He looked at her for a long, unreadable moment. "Then your name's Sylvie Beaumont. I work for Haverford. I imagine that's already a problem." "It isn't," he said. "Not for you." For 6 days, Sylvie's life continued with the fragile normalcy of a snow globe that had been shaken. She went to work. She reconciled numbers. She made coffee in the break room and listened to the office murmur about the incident at Obsidian, which the news had reported as an altercation between private security contractors. 2 people in hospital, no fatalities, police investigation pending. On the 7th evening, she was walking back to her condo from the grocery store on Queen Street, her canvas bag heavy with groceries, when a black Escalade rolled quietly to the curb beside her. The window came down. The man in the passenger seat was not Lucia. "Mrs. Beaumont," he said. "My name is Sebastien. Mr. Vale would like to meet with you." Sylvie looked at the car. She looked at Sebastien, who had the bearing of someone who did difficult things with complete equanimity. "Is this a request?" she said. "Or a request?" "It's genuinely a request," Sebastien said. He was clear about that. "He also asked me to tell you that he has something for you, and that it's not a threat or a debt. He said you'd want to know that up front." She did want to know that up front, which meant he had been thinking about what she would want to know. She got in the car. They drove north out of the city, as the February dark settled in around them, past the sprawl of Vaughan and into the rural belt beyond, where the road narrowed and the tree line pushed close on both sides. The gate they eventually stopped at was recessed into a stone wall and unmarked. The property beyond it was substantial, a stone house set back from a lake, every light burning warm against the winter dark. Sebastian led her inside and down a hallway hung with photographs that she made a private mental note to examine later, and opened a set of double doors. The room smelled of wood smoke and coffee and something quieter underneath, the particular smell of a room that was genuinely used by a person rather than assembled for appearances. There were books with broken spines. There were papers on the desk that had not been tidied for company. There was a fire. Lucien was standing by the window looking out at the frozen lake. He turned when she entered. He was in dark trousers and a grey sweater, and he looked, without the armor of the suit, like a man who was very tired and had been for a long time. "Sylvie," he said. "You had my name before you asked," she said. "You ran a background check 48 hours after the dinner," he confirmed. "I needed to understand what I was dealing with. And Sylvie Beaumont, certified professional accountant, master's degree in forensic financial analysis from Western, 3 letters of commendation from regulatory compliance boards, 1 formal reprimand on record for flagging a discrepancy that implicated a managing partner." He paused. "You were right about the discrepancy. He was wrong about his response. You kept your job, which means you were too valuable to let go of, and too principled to neutralize quietly. You've been managing that dynamic for 3 years." Sylvie set her grocery bag down on the floor. "You have excellent researchers. I have people who know how to look." He gestured toward the sitting area. "Please." She sat. He did not sit immediately, because she was beginning to understand that he was a man who didn't perform ease. He inhabited it, or he didn't. "Would you like to know what the note saved me from?" he asked. "The Kellerman Group," she said. "I know who they are. I've seen their financial signatures in 3 different client portfolios over the past year. They've been positioning against Northern Passage for at least 18 months. He sat down. He looked at her with the specific attention of a man recalibrating something. "You already knew," he said. "I knew the shape of it. I didn't know the personnel." She folded her hands in her lap. "Your account at Haverford has routing irregularities. I flagged internally twice. Both flags were archived without action." Silence. "Meaning someone at Haverford is reporting to the Kellerman Group," he said. "That's the working hypothesis." She looked at him steadily. "Which is also why I'm not entirely sure this meeting is safe." The corner of his mouth moved in a way that was not quite a smile but was in the same family. "This property is not connected to anything registered to Haverford or to me directly. Sebastien uses a different name professionally. The vehicle is registered to a numbered company in Fredericton. You thought of that?" "I've been thinking about a great many things since last Wednesday." He poured coffee from a carafe on the table between them without asking, which she found she didn't mind. He remembered from the restaurant that she had been drinking it. "You saw all of that in a single dinner, in a room where you were attending as a courtesy guest and had no reason to be watching." "I'm always watching," Sylvie said simply. "I don't know how to stop because..." She thought about deflecting. She didn't. "Because I've spent my entire career being underestimated," she said. "I'm not what people picture when they picture someone who matters in a room. I figured out early that meant I could either be invisible and useless, or invisible and extremely useful. I chose useful." She picked up the coffee cup. "People talk in front of me. They plan in front of me. They make phone calls they wouldn't make if they'd bothered to register that I was there. I have heard conversations in that building that would genuinely interest you." Lucien watched her. It was the kind of attention that she was not used to. Not the polite, slightly glazed attention of a man managing a social obligation, but the focused, total presence of someone for whom she was the only thing in the room. "You could have gone home," he said. "That night. You could have sat down, finished your wine, let the evening happen." "I could have," she agreed. "Why didn't you?" She held the coffee cup in both hands and thought about that. "Because you said thank you," she said. "Same reason as before. And because when I looked at you sitting at that table, I thought, this man is about to die and he doesn't know it. And that seemed," she searched for the word, "wrong, in a way I couldn't make myself ignore." He was quiet for a long time. "I want to offer you something," he said. "I assumed I want to hire you. Not to do anything illegal," he added, with a directness that she appreciated. "I have forensic accountants. I have lawyers. What I don't have is someone who can sit in a room and tell me who is lying, who is moving money they shouldn't be moving, who is about to act against my interests before they act." He leaned forward slightly. "You do that naturally, in rooms you have no stake in, with no training in tactical observation. I want to know what you could do with context and intention." Sylvie set the coffee cup down. "I want to see the Haverford routing discrepancy files first," she said. He opened a folder on the table in front of her. She looked at the documents. They were the internal records she had flagged, plus 3 additional reports she had never seen, which meant someone had been documenting longer than she had. She found the thread in 11 minutes. She traced it back through 4 shell accounts, 2 holding companies in the Cayman Islands, and 1 wire transfer that cleared on the same day that her second internal flag had been archived. She looked up. Lucien was watching her. "Your managing partner at Haverford is the reporting party," she said. "He's been routing information in exchange for a share of the Northern Passage receivables. Here, here, and here." She pointed at 3 lines on the document. The wire transfer on December 14th was the payment for the Obsidian operation. Lucien looked at the documents. He looked at her. 11 minutes, he said. "It's not a complicated structure," she said, which was generous, because it had actually been a fairly sophisticated structure, and she had simply been faster than it. He stood up. He walked to the window again, looking out at the lake. The ice on the surface had caught the light from the house. "My previous life," he said, "had a version of this. Someone who kept me informed, who I trusted. That arrangement ended badly 3 years ago." "The Kellerman Group's positioning started 18 months ago," Sylvie said. "The timeline is consistent with you operating without adequate intelligence since the previous arrangement ended." He turned from the window. He looked at her with something she didn't have a clean name for. "Are you always this precise?" he asked. "It's not precision," she said. "It's just seeing things." She paused. "I notice you haven't asked whether I'm afraid of you. Are you?" She considered it honestly. "Not in the way I think you mean. The kind of afraid that comes from not knowing what someone will do. I don't have that." She looked at him directly. "I'm afraid of the situation you operate in. That's rational. It should be feared. But you, specifically, no." He held her gaze for a long moment. "Then let me show you the contract," he said. The months that followed remade her life so quietly that Sylvie barely noticed until she looked back and couldn't see the old shape of it anymore. She gave her notice at Haverford in March, citing personal reasons, with 3 weeks paid departure. She did not tell them what she knew. She told the relevant regulatory body instead, through a channel that could not be traced back to her, and let the investigation proceed without her attached to it. Officially, she became a senior consulting analyst for Northern Passage Holdings. She had a very good salary, an office in Montreal that she used when she needed to, and the freedom to work from wherever she happened to be. Her actual function was undocumented, unannounced, and more interesting than anything she had done before. She attended meetings. She sat in corners. She watched. She told Lucien that his logistics director in Halifax had a secondary income source she had traced to a competing freight network in Portland. Correct, as confirmed 2 weeks later. She told him that a city councillor who had been offering advantageous zoning decisions was making those offers to 3 other parties simultaneously, which cost the councillor considerably more than his zoning leverage. She told him that the quiet man in the second row, at a shareholder briefing in Vancouver, had been placed there by the same insurance company that had denied one of Northern Passage's largest cargo claims 4 years prior. Each time she was right. Each time she watched Lucia absorb the information with the stillness of a man who had learned to receive things without reacting to them. Each time she found it slightly harder to leave the room after. She couldn't have explained when it changed. Exactly, because it didn't change in a moment. It changed the way weather changes, gradually, and then all at once. It was a late evening in Montreal in May, the 2 of them working through a portfolio review in the apartment Lucien kept there. She had come to understand that he kept quiet apartments in 6 cities, that the stone house in Ontario was the only one he thought of as home. They had been working for 4 hours. There was takeout from the Thai place 2 blocks over that she had introduced him to, and that he now ordered without asking her. The balcony doors were open and the city was making its particular spring sounds below them. She was reading a manifest, and she reached across for a second document at the same time he reached for it from the other direction. Their hands met on the paper. She didn't pull back immediately. Neither did he. When she looked up, he was already looking at her, and there was something in his expression that she had seen accumulating for weeks without fully allowing herself to name it. "Lucien," she said. "I know," he said. "You're going to tell me it complicates things. It does complicate things." "Yes." He turned his hand under hers, and his fingers were warm and very careful, the way they were, with things he considered important not to damage. "I've been thinking about that. The complications. I've been thinking about them rather more than is useful for portfolio analysis." She laughed unexpectedly. He looked at her when she laughed the way someone looks at a light coming on. "I've been doing the same," she admitted. "Then we're both being inefficient," he said. "I'm usually very efficient. I know. It's one of the many things He stopped. He started again with the careful deliberateness of a man who was not accustomed to saying what he meant directly and was choosing to do it anyway. "You walked into a room where I was the most dangerous person present, and you saw me more clearly than anyone in my organization has managed in 4 years. You do not look at me with fear, and you do not look at me with calculation. You look at me like I'm a person." He paused. I had forgotten what that felt like. Sylvie looked at him. She looked at him the way she looked at everything, fully, directly, without the deflection she had spent years perfecting. "I look at you," she said, "because you're worth looking at, which is different from what I say to myself at 2 in the morning about why I should maintain professional distance." "What do you say at 2 in the morning?" "That it's complicated, that the risk profile is significant, and that I am very likely reading the situation incorrectly." She held his gaze. "I am not reading the situation incorrectly." "No," he said. "You never do." He kissed her with the same quality of attention he brought to everything. Complete, unhurried, absolute. She kissed him back and stopped apologizing internally for the space she took up, stopped editing herself into something smaller, stopped waiting for the other shoe that had spent 31 years threatening to drop. He pulled back just enough to see her face. "You should know," he said, "that I intend to be very unreasonable about your safety. I've been managing my own safety for 31 years. I know. You no longer have to do it alone." She thought about arguing. She decided not to. The Northern Passage annual gala was held in June at the Ritz-Carlton in Montreal, which was the sort of event that occupied the overlap of Venn diagram circles, marked legitimate business, and everyone knows what's actually here. It was black tie. It was very well catered. The room contained 4 federal MPs, 2 provincial ministers, a significant portion of the organized freight industry in eastern Canada, and the particular careful social choreography of people who had a great deal to protect. Lucien arrived late, which was his habit, It was also tactical. The room assembled first, and he could read it from the entrance. This time, he was not alone. Sylvie came in beside him in a dress the color of deep water, a blue-green silk that had been made for her by the tailor. Lucien had called without telling her, and that she had pretended to be irritated by, while privately being stunned by the fact that it fit her body exactly as her body was, with no apology and no architectural correction. Her hair was down for the first time he had seen it in a professional context. She wore his grandmother's earrings, which he had offered, and she had almost refused until she saw his expression. She looked like someone who had decided to be seen. The room registered them. She felt it move through the crowd like a frequency, the slight shift, the second glances, the recalculation happening in real time, behind carefully maintained expressions. The bookkeeper from Haverford, the woman who had moved through this world as furniture for 3 years on his arm. As herself, a senior figure in the freight consortium moved toward them. A man named Bergeron, who had always managed a particular brand of patrician dismissal when he encountered her at industry events. He stopped in front of them. "Lucien," he said, "and this must be your new." "This is Sylvie Beaumont," Lucien said, before Bergeron could categorize her. His hand at the small of her back was warm and settled. "She's my partner, in every sense of the word." He let that sit for a moment. "And she already knows considerably more about your arrangement with the Portland Freight Network than you'd be comfortable with. So I'd recommend whatever you were about to say be something that doesn't waste her time." Bergeron's face went through a small but comprehensive journey. "Mims Beaumont," he said, with considerably more care than he had ever said anything to her before. "Mr. Bergeron," she said, "I'll have the Portland file on Lucien's desk by Thursday. We can discuss the terms then." She watched him move away. She looked out at the room, at the careful faces, the managed expressions, the architecture of power being quietly negotiated over excellent wine, and felt something shift inside her that had been in one position for a very long time. Lucien leaned slightly toward her. "What do you see?" She scanned the room with the attention she had carried her whole life, the attention that had saved him, that had quietly rewritten both their lives in the space between a water glass and a folded piece of compliance paper. "Table 6 has a problem," she said. Third man from the left. "He's been watching the door instead of the conversation. Something he's waiting for hasn't arrived yet." Lucien's hand pressed briefly at her back. "Later," he said. "Tell me later." She looked at him. She let herself look at him, fully, in a room full of people who were now looking at her. "Later," she agreed. She had spent years learning to be invisible. She had never expected that the thing waiting for her on the other side of it was this, being entirely, irreversibly seen.